All right, good morning again, everyone. Again, my name is Lacey Villava, and I'm the education manager here. I am joined this morning by one of the members of our guest services team, Laura Hollywood, who has been my partner in crime in developing this program. We've also got on the call Holly Irwin, who's helping out with some of the technical aspects in the background. If you have any issues, you can send a chat to Holly, who is listed as the co-host. But we're also, as I mentioned, taking verbal questions. We just, as I mentioned, we do ask that you leave yourself muted unless you are, in fact, asking us a question. So today we're making two 18th century recipes. We are going to first make a recipe called Cracknels, and then we are going to make a recipe called drinking chocolate. Today, what we would think of as hot chocolate. Oh, and I see also we have Rachel in here. I think that is Rachel Anderson, who is another one of our hearth cooking experts. Hi, Rachel. And Rachel is also amazing and may pop in with some thoughts and questions for us and for you as we go through the program. So I'm going to get us started. We are going to take a look at our recipes for today. So let's get started. So oh, I did not, actually I did. Okay. We are going to get started with our Cracknels, and the ingredients list for that is over there on the left. This one is 100% a staff hit. Every time I make Cracknels, somebody wanders into the kitchen and is like, "Are you making Cracknels? Can I have one?" So we'll get started with those, and then we'll do the drinking chocolate second. Now, before we really dig into making this recipe, I want for us to take a look at the historic version of it. So I'm going to put this up on screen for just a few moments. Go ahead and take a look. And I'm curious if there's anything that stands out about this recipe to you. And you can unmute yourself or you can chuck it in the chat, whichever you prefer. And we will have that open and be answering those as well. I do see a question in the chat about whether or not we will be sending the presentation after the class so that you have the recipes. We are going to post the recipes and the recordings on our website post-program so that you will be able to have them. All right, so does anybody have anything that stands out about this recipe to them? Yeah, Queen Cake Tins is an interesting name for the cutter, Carolyn. Queen's cakes are another 18th century recipe, and they're a very small, think mini muffin size little cake. We serve those here at Gunston Hall too on occasion. I don't have Queen Cake tins, so today I am they're currently holding my caraway seeds, but I'm using this little cup as my cutter today. You can use a shot glass if you have a smaller cutter like this size. You can use that as well. Anything else that stands out about this recipe for you? The caraway seeds are an interesting flavor. I don't normally like caraway seeds, but caraway seeds, in contrast with the sugar, I think gives them this really awesome, sweet, savory blend. And I do like the caraway seeds in this, whereas I don't like it in, say, a rye bread. Just adding a few. There aren't very many very solid measurements, Carolyn. That's correct. We've got a few. We've got, as somebody mentioned in the chat as well, a slow oven. So our slow oven today is 325 degrees. So if you're cooking along with us, you'll want to get your oven turned on, set to 325. And we will be getting started in just a minute. You guys have picked out some really amazing things about this recipe that are really different from what we talk about today. Yeah, Rachel, beating the sugar is a good one. We will not be beating our sugar today because we are using granulated sugar from the grocery store. So we have adapted this recipe for you, and we're going to get started making it right now. So you've got that ingredients list that you can download off the website. I printed my copy out, and I have actually already measured out everything that I'm going to be cooking with today so that I don't have to think too hard about it. But like I said, you want to get your oven started to 325. Okay, so I'm getting started with my butter. I have a little half stick of butter here that's just 4 tablespoons. And that's what you need for this recipe. I have butter on the floor now. I did not manage to drop it in the bowl, so I'm going to rescue some more butter in just a second. But I'm going to get the rest of this stick in the bowl. So we want our butter to be fairly soft. Because we want to be able to manipulate it and get everything mixed in. All right, there's that last bit of butter that I needed. So that last bit isn't quite as soft as I would like. It's going to be a little hard, right, Rachel, using my 18th century techniques? We don't have any pastry cutters. So I've added my flour to my bowl. I'm also going to add my sugar and my caraway seeds. And today in our modern kitchens, we would probably use a pastry blender to beat in the butter. Today I am going to use an 18th century method of a fork. Sometimes recipes also call for using 2 knives to cut the butter into the flour. So I'm going to go ahead and get all of that mixed in. And you're looking for a sort of crumbly dough, kind of like a biscuit dough if you've ever made biscuits. Okay, so I've got my butter mixed in to my flour. It's got a nice crumbly texture. And my last ingredient is ready to go in. And, oh, I just found a big clump, so let me get that out first. All right. So my last ingredient is my egg. So I'm gonna crack that. Give it just a little bit of a beat before I drop it into my mixture. And it's time to stir everything up. Now this dough is really fascinating. It is unlike pretty much any other dough I have ever worked with. The measurements to me look like they just aren't gonna come together. This is not gonna be a dough that works. But I've gotten to a point where I've got my egg stirred in as much as I'm going to get it with my fork. So I'm just starting to work it with my hand, and I'm working it just until it comes together into one big lump of dough. So there's the dough. It's all come together in a mass. And the very first time I ever made this, I looked at it and I was like, there is no way in heck this is gonna make 7 dozen cookies. But it does. So I'm using a pastry board today to do my rolling out because I don't have a good surface to do it here, but you can use your counter at home, the back of a baking tray, whatever you have that's really smooth and level. So I'm just spreading out a little bit of flour so it doesn't stick too hard. All right, I am just gonna take a small amount of it to start with because it can dry out. So I've got my nice little lump there. I'm gonna drop that on my board, flatten it out a little bit with my hands, and then start rolling it out. It does look a little dry today. And that could be because this kitchen is a little dry. The humidity is not particularly high. But it's not cracking too badly, so I think we're in good shape. So as you can see, that little wad of dough has spread really nicely. So that is about 1/4 of an inch thick, maybe a little thinner than that. And I'm going to take that glass that I have my caraway seeds in and start pressing out my cookies. And these are releasing really nicely from my pastry. It is one of those days.
You're very Julia Child.
Yeah. They're releasing really nicely from the pastry board today, but there are some days where they stick like nobody's business. And that is why you saw the palette knife or the thin spatula on the recipe, or sorry, on the supplies list, because they can help lift it off the surface if you're having trouble with them sticking. And I have had that happen more than once. But these are lifting really nicely today. I can actually, if I'm sneaky, just keep cutting with a couple of them stuck in the cup. Okay. So as you can see, these guys are really, really thin. They're really small. So I'm just gonna start laying this whole batch out on my baking tray, which I have prepared with parchment paper. You can also use aluminum foil if that's what you've got at home. They don't need any grease on any of these surfaces because they're of the ratio of butter. And if you grease them, they won't cook right. And you'll end up, you won't get the nice crispy crack where the Cracknels get the name. Carolyn, yes, I do see your question. I added the caraway seeds when I put in my dry ingredients, and I must have missed shouting those out loud because we were having keyboard technical issues. So the caraway seeds went in with the dry ingredients. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see them. Yep, there you go. You can see the caraway seeds just nicely pressed in there. All right, so you can see I've got these fairly close together on the tray. They're not super spaced out. I'm going to drop them into my 325-degree oven for about 8 to 10 minutes. And I'm going to do a quick wash on my hands, and Laura can get us started thinking about chocolate.
Yeah, so give me 1 second. I'm going to start my video up. And you should have a nice view of my stovetop here. And I'm going to get myself round in position in just a second. All right, so can everyone see my screen? Ta-da. And hear me?
Yep, perfect, Laura.
Perfect. So when I move around to start doing this, I will not be able to see the chat. So I'm going to ask that Rachel or Lacey read things out to me so that way I can answer as things come up.
Absolutely.
All right, perfect. So I get the really exciting job of making drinking chocolate today, which is one of my favorite things to make. And it's actually pretty easy, not quite as easy as opening a packet of cocoa today, but considering all the things that go into it, it's pretty good. So I actually started my stovetop already because our old stovetop is a little bit slow to start, but I'm gently heating up my pot because the first ingredient is chocolate. Now, if you've ever watched Great British Baking Show, you will know that Dame Mary Berry likes to say chocolate will melt in a child's pocket. And what we want to make sure is that when we put this chocolate over heat, we do not burn it. So we have two things to help us. One is that I'm going to add water to my chocolate when I put it in to give it something to sit in. Two, we don't want the heat up too high. We want to take this low and slow. So I'm going to go ahead. So our recipe calls for half a cup. However, I am making enough chocolate for 3 people. So I have used more. I'm using more, like 1.25 cups probably. And then I put in enough water to cover it and give it a bath. So my stovetop was much hotter than I thought it was going to be because this is not my home stovetop. So this actually melted much quicker than I thought it would. However, you can see that there are lumps in here, and we don't want lumps. We want to make sure this is nice and smooth. So it does need a little bit longer on a nice low heat. And in that case, you will need to sometimes add a little bit of sweetener to it. However, in the 18th century style, they liked their chocolate very dark compared to today. They did not have milk chocolate back then. That process of making that did not come around until the 19th century. So even though people are mixing sugar into their chocolate to sweeten it a little bit, because chocolate is incredibly bitter on its own, they were not making milk chocolate. Yeah, and you can eat, and like I made this past week at home, and I used a bar of 60% dark chocolate. So again, didn't need to add any sugar to it. It was great on its own. But what we're just looking to do here is remove as many of these lumps and bumps as possible, and that's just going to happen through melting. It is mostly melted, but you can see it is pretty thick. It's not water thin. So even though we've added the water to it, it's not super liquidy. 18th century style did tend towards a thick drinking chocolate. You never want to see your chocolate bubbling. If your chocolate starts bubbling around the edges like it's simmering or boiling, you need to get it off the heat because it will burn at that point. Usually when I do this, I do, oh, go ahead, Lacey.
We have a question about the cookies, and I'm sorry I didn't get that chat in the chat. The cookies bake for 8 to 10 minutes. So we're just at a point where I'm getting ready to take a peek at mine and see how they're doing while Laura is continuing to make her chocolate.
And I know it's hard to tell. I'll try to tilt a little bit so you can see, but there is definitely less lumps and bumps. So don't feel rushed in making your chocolate. Like, take it easy, revel in the journey of it.
Chocolate, when I make chocolate at home, it's something that I often just let sit on the stove on super low temp while I continue to work on, say, cookies.
Yeah, and when and typically, like today, because my stove is so slow to start, I did start it early, but usually I put the chocolate in first, then heat the stove, and then I bring it up little bit by little bit. But again, this stove is it's different than the one I have at home. So,
And if we're doing it over a fire, it's all dependent on what the fire feels like doing today.
Yes. Yeah, there's so many things. And what's really cool is, and unfortunately, I don't have an example for you here, but they actually did make a special kind of chocolate pot. So you have teapots, you have coffee pots, and you have chocolate pots for mixing all these ingredients together. So there were a couple different ways to go about making your chocolate. This is just one way to do it.
And one of the really cool things about those chocolate pots, Laura, is, I'm sure you know this, but I'm curious if anybody else on this knows, these chocolate pots were amazing. Some of these chocolate pots were amazingly fancy. And Maggie, I see your question about the double boiler. And some of them, maybe they were making the chocolate in some sort of double boiler fashion, probably more likely in a pot like this one, although one that's intended for use over a fire. And then they were pouring them into these porcelain chocolate pots. And that might be something that we see on the Mason's table. Now, everybody in society had access to chocolate, but they may not have had one of those really fancy porcelain pots. Laura and Rachel, you guys have probably made it with me in the redware pot that we have and we use in the hearth kitchen here. And a redware pot can get put right on the stove.
Yep.
Over
Same
the
thing
fire.
if you have a copper pot. The copper pot can also be placed near your heat source.
Right.
So yeah, there's the chocolate pot you actually use for cooking, and then there's the sort of presentational chocolate pot.
Right.
That the finished product goes in and then is used for entertaining. But the really cool thing, like she said, is that in colonial America, chocolate was actually in this form readily available for people of many social levels. It was not limited to the nobility or the gentry, I should say. Whereas in England and other parts of Europe, it was a more limited access. Part of the reason we have chocolate so widely available in colonial America is we are importing it from just south of us. It's coming from Central and South America, from the Spanish Empire, and it's literally a matter of geography. The second matter is that the colonies and then the early US have many mills that are producing this chocolate, because chocolate comes from cacao, but it must be processed first.
Laura,
So
I'm gonna interrupt you for a second because
yes.
my cookies are done. So I'm pulling my cookies out of the oven, and you should be able to see them on screen now. Laura, can you stop stirring for just a second, just to make sure?
Absolutely.
So you should be able to see that the cookies are just starting to color. There are a couple of them in the middle that were a little thinner, that got a little darker, but they just get color, and now it's time to put them on a cooling rack until they're cool. So Laura, are you at a point where you can add milk?
Yeah, I was just thinking, oh good, it looks just like it should. So yeah, so I'll tilt so you guys can see, but you can see how nice and thick it is. And so this is the point where I'm going to add my milk and my spices. Now the milk is a bit to taste. So like I said, 18th century people tended to like theirs a bit thick. However, people today tend to enjoy their chocolate a little thinner. So what I'm going to do is pour mine in just a little bit at a time. So that way I can eyeball it and decide if there's enough, if there's too much. You can't take it back out, so that's why you should go slow. So pour just a little bit in.
I add mine like half a cup at a time when I'm making a big batch like Laura is. And we stir
You might
it.
also need to turn the heat back up just a teeny little bit to make sure everything mixes in together well, because it will cool off once you're adding cold milk. So that's pretty good, but I like mine just a little bit more, especially since I'm going to be serving this to 3 people and not just 1. There we go. That's no problem.
Carolyn, you want to keep stirring it until it is very, very smooth. Once you start adding the milk, Laura and Rachel, I'm sure you've both experienced this, it crackles up a bit, and you start seeing these tiny little like bars of chocolate. They're trying to describe, they look like jimmies to me almost. In the chocolate, and you want to stir that out until it is totally smooth. If it's got those little jimmies in it, you haven't gotten the mixture quite together yet.
So you'll see I'm just doing a little bit at a time. And yeah, you can see mine's nice and smooth, that you can't see any of those little chunks in here.
Carolyn has also mentioned using a whisk. Absolutely, go for it. Use a whisk. Because some of these really fancy pots that we know about also have this really cool tool in them that basically you stir it up until it comes to a froth at the top of the chocolate, so you get this nice head. We're not going to go for that today. We're going for sort of a middling class chocolate, even though the Masons had it. But looking at the chocolate, looking at the cookies, looking at the dishes that they have, this is something that we're making today that would have been available only to people of the upper class. And as we look at those things that they have, as we think about them here at Gunston Hall, we're also thinking, of course, about rights and rights that these people had. And if we came into somebody's house in the 18th century and they had, this chocolate, these cookies together with all of the spices that Laura's looking at right there, we're in the house of somebody who's really out there and has all of the rights, and we'll be looking at people whose rights aren't as strong, aren't as prevalent, and we'll be able to see that based on the food that they're eating as well. But it looks like Laura is about ready to add some spices. Now, we didn't
Yeah.
put any spices in the list, in the supplies list. This is something that is to taste. So we recommend starting out, and I don't know how you feel about it, Rachel. I recommend starting out this kind of chocolate plain Jane to start with. It's an experience in and of itself.
Can I admit that I do not like drinking chocolate?
So first time you ever have it, we recommend, starting plain. But as Laura has been mentioning, spices were really common, and they're using all kinds of things. And it looks like Laura is getting ready to drop in some cinnamon.
No, I'm starting with cayenne. I'm going in alphabetical order
Ooh,
today.
Cayenne. If I'm gonna drink it, it's gotta have the cayenne. Yeah.
And I'm only using a teeny little bit because even with this much, cayenne goes a long way. So I put more in this bowl than I'm going to use. So I'm just going to pinch it and sprinkle that on in. Maybe just a teeny bit more. There we go. And then I do have cinnamon. So I've got cinnamon next. So ta-da. And it's crazy thing because cinnamon today is so prevalent in everything. But in the 18th century, and even today still, it has to be imported from the other side of the world. So this is very costly in the 18th century to import, to buy, and to keep in stock in your home. So what we see as I go down, so like here's another one, ginger. Again, just a little pinch of that. And I'm actually going to skip over nutmeg and go to mace. So just a pinch of mace. A little bit more. And then nutmeg I'm going to do last because I actually have a grater for it. I'm doing this old school. So I have a grater and then I have actual nutmeg. So most people maybe are used to seeing, it powdered, but it does actually come as this little piece. And this one we've already used before, so it actually is already curved. And so I'm just going to, well, I can drop the whole thing in there too. That works. Pull that out, rescue it. Oh no. There we go. Put him over here. But the great thing about nutmeg is that
I looked away from the computer. Laura, did you drop nutmeg in your chocolate?
I did.
It happens.
We're just having one of those days.
This happens all the time. All the time for us.
There we go.
Maggie, Laura, Rachel, Maggie is asking a question. How frequently would drinking chocolate be served?
So I have my favorite period source talking about drinking chocolate and like how prevalent is it and like how are people enjoying it is an Englishman who visits and is a little bit surprised to see so many people enjoying it. And he says that he's noticed a servant girl drinking it like out the back door like of somewhere and just kind of sitting and enjoying it. So fairly common. Again, it depends on your class. So the chocolate itself is not expensive. The spices are what's expensive. So if you're someone who maybe likes it, but only likes it with spices, this may be like a once a year thing for you. You save it for the holidays when your family is gathered. Other people, like the Washingtons, we know are regularly serving it. At one point, Washington bought 50 pounds of chocolate, specifically for use in drinking chocolate and in desserts. So it runs the full gamut of people who are like, this is a once a year treat, all the way to, oh no, we're offering this every single day alongside tea and coffee.
And how did they, when he bought 50 pounds of chocolate, what form was it in?
Oh, fabulous question. So it came as a set of bars. So if you everyone has seen molded chocolate when you buy a Hershey's bar, it's been poured into a mold. It's just a very shallow mold. You can actually make them in bricks. And the fabulous thing about those bricks is that they tend to be 100% cacao. And when cacao has been made into chocolate and it is still 100% and nothing's been added to it, it does not go bad very easily at all. There are archaeological excavations that have been done in Central and South America where they have found chocolate that is thousands of years old, left in the remnants of pots and things, and it is technically still edible. Don't know that I'm going to eat 2,000-year-old chocolate, but it's there. But we know that Washington can order 50 pounds of chocolate in these bricks, and then as they're using the bricks, they don't have to worry about shelf stability because they can sit there for easily months with no problem. Once they have the bricks, it's then grated. So we started today with chips. However, we could have started with grated chocolate as well.
And the other thing that's really cool about some of those loaves is that some chocolate makers do pre-spice their chocolate and sell it with the spices already in it. So you could spice it to your taste, or if you liked how somebody else spiced it, you could get that flavor in and of yourself. You could get that flavor from somebody else. So I do want to mention it is 11:11. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. If you need to pop up, we do appreciate you being with us. But if you hang on for just a couple more moments, Laura's got the chocolate, getting ready to pour it. I also delivered some Cracknels to her, so I think she's going to have a taste of Cracknel with chocolate in just a moment.
Yeah, I got to do the hard part now, which is pouring this and trying to like make even portions for everyone.
Also, you can see how thick the chocolate.
I was gonna say, yeah.
thick.
Hopefully, this is a good demonstration of like
Did
just
you pour a
how
little more on that first
thick.
one? Yeah. Whenever I'm serving this at Gunston, I always tell people I'm not shorting you when I'm pouring this into the cup. You really only need a little bit.
Yeah, if this was a Starbucks, this would be a tall. And you really don't want more than that. I love drinking chocolate, and even I'm like, no, thank you. That's enough for me. I'm not going to move that cup any closer because my burner is still warm, but I will bring over the Cracknels. Oh, I just dropped one.
I heard it go crack.
But yeah, here's one of our little guys. Ta-da! Beautiful.
Can you crack it for us, Laura? Can you break it?
Absolutely. Yeah, if you didn't hear the one that just fell on the floor. So.
They have that nice solid crack, and that's the combination of the butter and the sugar. And then we do see lots of cookies, like Cracknels and others, that they recommend you dip them into your drinking chocolate and then eat them. And let me tell you, it's amazing.
Got our little doop. It looks so elegant this way too.
It does. It's beautiful. All right, what's our verdict, Laura? How does it taste?
Oh my goodness, it's so good. Especially with the chocolate. And I love drinking chocolate, and I do enjoy drinking it, but it's also really great for dipping because it is a bit more thick.
Yes.
It's not quite a sauce exactly, but it combines very well with the Cracknels.
Yeah.
Lacey, someone asked very early on, and I know we're running late, but it was a really good question, which is, did hearth cooks in the time know what a slow oven was?
Yes, I'm sorry I missed that one. So slow ovens, the gradations of ovens are really fascinating in the 18th century. They range from slow to quick. And a quick oven is a really hot oven. And we, based on basically archaeological discovery in experimenting with these recipes, have discovered that a quick oven is somewhere between 350 to 400 degrees, and a slow oven is somewhere between 325. And they would have been able to determine that based on experience. So you would learn from somebody who had experience cooking. They would say, okay, this is enough. This is right. This is what this oven should be. And some people stick their hands in ovens to tell that just for a couple of seconds. Some people have just this ken where they're like, we know what this temperature is. And so they do that. So I'm seeing some other great questions and some thoughts in the chat. I do want to wrap up. Laura, Rachel, and I will hang out for a few more minutes if anybody else has any other thoughts or questions, but I do just want to put out there, this is the first of our History in the Kitchen series. We will be continuing next week on the 17th and in 4 weeks on the 31st. Next week, we'll be looking at the food of people who were enslaved here at Gunston Hall and making some things with stuff right out of our garden here at Gunston, which I'm very excited about. And on the 31st, we'll be making pumpkin fritters in honor both of Halloween and the every people, the farmers, the tradespeople, the people who were not the Masons, not people enslaved, were somewhere in between. And those will be happening at the same time, 10:30 in the morning, each of those Saturdays. One other thing that I want to put out, and I want to say thank you to somebody who put a shout out about this in the chat. These programs are complimentary. We are not able to do them without your amazing support. Watching them today tells us that we're doing a good job, but we also appreciate financial donations if you're able to make them. You can find out how to give, how to become a member and get member benefits as well on our website at gunstonhall.org/support/give. And we'll put that in the chat in just a second. We appreciate anything that you can give us in support of programs like this one. Thank you so much for participating today, everybody.
Yeah, thank you for all your great questions.